Welcome, everyone. Today I'll be giving a quick review of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. Don't worry, this video will be spoiler free. I won't ruin any aspects of the plot or give a plot summary or anything of that nature. So don't worry about that. You can watch this video before reading this book. I won't give away anything of any great importance. As to an overall structure of this video, firstly I'll discuss what I liked about this book, followed by what I disliked about this book. I'll wrap this video up by giving an overall conclusion as to whether you should read this book or you should just pass over it on your reading journey. So without any further ado, let's dive in and let's get started. And by the way, I promise that will be the last nautical joke that I'll give that's kind of very corny and on the nose. To give an overall impression to the reader, or prospective reader in this case, as to what this book is about, it follows the journey of three men, Pierre Aronnax, the narrator, Conseil, his assistant, and Ned Land, Canadian harpooner, as they go on a very marvelous and fabulous adventure aboard a submarine called the Nautilus. To start off with, I really enjoyed the characters, particularly the narrator, Pierre Aronnax. Yeah, he's a very analytical and knowledgeable man of the seas. By trade, he's a marine biologist, and so logically he knows an awful lot about the ocean, particularly the marine life that inhabits it. Excuse me. It's really wonderful as you read his descriptions of what he sees, the various flora and fauna beneath the surfaces of the waves. You really feel like you're with him, as cliched as that sound, as you're experiencing all these amazing sights and experiences under the waves. His assistant Conseil, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm sorry if I butchered it. He's a Flemish fellow. Please let me know down in the comments if what the correct pronunciation is. I haven't been able to figure it out on my own, even with the help of Google. But anyway, back to the story. Conseil, a very reliable and trustworthy sort of fellow, as Aronnax goes on to demonstrate throughout the pages of this novel. You instinctively put trust in him, and he's a pillar of strength both for Ned Land and also for Aronnax. That brings me on to the final character, Ned Land, and he's a sharp contrast to both Aronnax and Conseil. He's a Canadian harpooner. He's a man who doesn't take fools lightly. He's very, very outspoken. And he's more of a man of action as opposed to a man of scholarly research and reason. I'm not bashing Ned Land in any way. It's just nice to see that contrast in people. And they both play off very well against each other, Pierre Aronnax and Ned Land. It's very, very funny to see in the pages of the novel, and I won't discuss any more because I do not want to spoil any aspects of the plot. In addition to this, I really enjoyed the steampunk-like technology used throughout the story. For instance, a great example of this is the air guns that Captain Nemo, the commander of the Nautilus, uses for hunting underwater. Having no access to gunpowder because Captain Nemo is a permanent nomad of the seas, it makes logical sense for Nemo to use compressed air, as well as to the fact that they're fired underwater. The density of water, this is just a standard unit that we use for engineering. It's 1,000 kilograms per meter cubed. For seawater, it could be less dense or more dense, depending on how much additional material is in it, like dissolved salts and so on and so forth. But that is far, far, far denser than air. And so you need something with a bit more oomph to penetrate through that, and compressed air does that very, very well. One aspect which I thought was very inventive of Jules Verne was the projectiles of the air gun, and this is actually described in very great detail on page 66 of the book. Let me read it for you right now. Because the balls sent by this gun are not ordinary balls, but little cases of glass, invented by Liebenbrock, an Austrian chemist, of which I have a large supply. These glass cases are covered with a case of steel and weighed with a pellet of lead. They are real Leyden bottles, into which the electricity is forced to a very high tension. With the slightest shock they are discharged, and the animal, however strong it may be, falls dead. I must tell you that these cases are size number 4, and that the charge for an ordinary gun would be 10. That's Captain Nemo speaking, but it really goes to illustrate to you the creative extent of Jules Verne's imagination, and it's really brilliant in my mind. Like, Verne has thought of absolutely everything in regards to the technology that's being used aboard the Nautilus. It's really wonderful. And while we're on the topic of technology, by the way, Verne correctly predicts many aspects of modern-day submarines. This is all the more extraordinary when you consider that this book was first published in 1870. For historical context, that's 5 years after the American Civil War ended. At this stage, submarines as a practical technology were, just in their very infancy, and the very inception of their technology. They were only barely just becoming practical. Okay, so true, as some people who know a lot about naval history will tell you, in the American Civil War, the Confederate Navy did use a submarine. It was called the HMS Huntley, I believe, and it sank the Union warship, the Housatonic, off the coast of America in February 1864, I believe. However, the Huntley, it wasn't the best submarine. I would describe it as ineffective at best, considering it also sunk itself in the process, and downright suicidally dangerous to use at worst, considering that on previous test dives it actually killed the crew, and included in the crew was the designer of the submarine. He was a guy called Horace Lawson Huntley. You're probably seeing a picture of him on screen now. He's a very dapper gentleman with a nice little goatee beard. On a side note, he was not such a nice character in real life, because apparently, doing a bit of research into him, he was a slave owner. So it's well known that Jules Verne took inspiration from the plongeur. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please let me know in the comments down below. Which was a French submarine, a prototype French submarine to be more specific, which Jules Verne saw a model of in 1867. The inspiration is clear, with plongeur possessing a ram, just like the Nautilus in the book. And however, Verne's Nautilus uses electricity to propel itself underwater, while I believe the plongeur used compressed air, and the HL Huntley used a number of men just kind of very rapidly cranking a hand crank to actually propel it forwards, which would have been absolutely incredibly difficult work. I can only imagine that those men must have been feeling all sorts of hurt and unpleasantness in that death trap. As a matter of interest, 7 decades later, with the Battle of the Atlantic raging in World War II, German U-boats used a mixture of diesel engines for surface operations, and also to charge their batteries, and electric motors for underwater use, such as attacking enemy shipping. And this clearly shows that Jules Verne was way ahead of his time in correctly predicting the fact that submarines would use electricity for underwater use. Interestingly enough, the first fellow to design and build the first practical submarine was an Irishman. His name was John Philip Holland, and he was born in Liscannor in County Clare. He's a very fascinating character to research into, and his submarine was the first commissioned sub of the US Navy. His designs were also sold to the British and the Japanese, who went on to license produce his design, and from that license production, they would go on to build their own designs of submarines. Another thing I enjoyed was the vivid descriptions that Jules Verne gives of the underwater landscape. And here's an example from a diving excursion from the Nautilus, which is on page 68 of the novel. The light which lit the soil 30 feet below the surface of the ocean astonished me for its power. The solar rays shone through the watery mass easily and dissipated all colour, and I clearly distinguished objects at a distance of 150 yards. Beyond that, the tints have darkened into fine granulations of ultramarine, and faded into vague obscurity. Truly this water which surrounded me was but another air, denser than terrestrial atmosphere, but almost as transparent. Above me was the calm of the sea, We were walking on fine even sand, not wrinkled as on a flat shore, which retains the impression of the billows. This dazzling carpet, really reflector, repelled the rays of the sun with wondrous intensity, which accounted for the vibration which penetrated every atom of liquid. Shall I be believed when I say that at a depth of 30 feet I could see as if I was in broad daylight? Absolutely lovely passage from Jules Verne. I just love the language that he uses. He really captures your imagination. You really feel as if you are Pierre Aronnax and walking under the surface of the sea. The only thing I really disliked about the novel, about the novel book, whatever you want to call it, was the ending. And I won't. I promise you, I won't spoil the ending. But it does end on a cliffhanger. I find it very frustrating when an author does this because it's an obvious way of suckering the reader into buying the next book in the series. In this case, Jules Verne wrote another book, The Mysterious Island, which details the overall fate of the Nautilus and Captain Nemo. However, it's undeniably effective, as Rob Thomas, the creator of Veronica Mars, can certainly attest to. I think it's really tacky when, at the end of a certain episode of that show, it ends on a cliffhanger, but it's very, very effective at suckering you into watching the next episode. That's for sure. Um, To conclude the video, I would wholeheartedly recommend that you read this book, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It's an incredibly well-written story, which makes you intrigued, certainly laugh in parts, but it also provokes a sense of childlike wonder and curiosity as to underwater life and nautical exploits in general. I cannot recommend you reading this book enough. My words are an ill substitute for doing so. Thank you very, very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please leave me a like or a comment below. And yes, I'll see you again next time. Bye bye.